On today's episode of the McCann Dogs Podcast.
And if you have a dog that is absolutely obsessed with the water, you'll want to make sure that you put fail-safes in place so that they're not falling in through the pool cover, etc. when you decide to go for a swim.
The McCann Dogs Podcast is brought to you by McCann Professional Dog Trainers. We help dog owners to have a well-behaved, four-legged family member. And now, Instructor Shannon.
I'm Instructor Shannon. I'm in the studio with Instructor Swanny, and we wanted to talk a little bit about some fun activities that usually come along with the nice weather because, of course, we're preoccupied with the onset of spring here. So today's episode, we're going to talk all about swimming, some of the dangers that come along with swimming with our dogs, how to introduce our dogs to the water in a nice way that helps them build confidence and joy for swimming. You have a lot of experience with dogs swimming.
I don't have as much experience as you do.
Okay.
Yes, I've never had, my dogs have all liked to swim.
Okay.
But they haven't really been naturals at it.
Okay.
And I know your dogs just adore the water.
So toddlers aren't necessarily known for their water courage. When I first got into the breed and I was getting into field work, there was a lot of issues with water courage and toddlers that wouldn't swim, etc. So I think that helped me really develop tactics to make sure, because I was instantly hooked on field work, right from Jaden, right from my first toddler. As soon as I experienced the world of field work, I think it's because I really love instinctual behaviors.
Yes.
I love watching them figure things out. I love watching what drives them naturally. And that's what they're bred to do. They're bred to be field dogs. When I first got into field work with Jaden, I was so fascinated with that. And I was reading so much about toddlers having water courage issues that I really thought long and hard about how I was going to introduce my toddlers to water, how I was going to ensure they loved water, etc. And I also, my Rottweiler, she ended up loving swimming, but it took her until she was about 3 years of age. And actually it was Jaden loving swimming that she was like, oh, maybe I can try it too. So just, out of observation, she thought this might be fun. And she ventured off the shoreline. We had a cottage for a long time. We sold it many years ago, but she grew up there and she learned to play along the shoreline, but she would never really venture out to swim until Jaden came into the picture and he was eager to get out there further. One of the first things that I consider when I'm considering introducing one of my toddlers to water would be temperatures.
Yes.
So let's talk about that for a bit. What do you think we should be cautious of in terms of like spring and fall and like early season, late season?
Well, the water's very, very cold.
Yes.
And like if I wouldn't go into it, I don't want my dog to go into it as a young puppy. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And even if you have a purpose-built dog, like a toddler or a golden or a lab, these dogs are generally built to be able to withstand the water. If you think about poodles, for example, poodles are actually sporting dogs as well. And that funny clip that you see on them was actually, it was done for a purpose. Those little bulbs on the rear end were meant to keep the kidneys warm, for example. Like, even though it looks kind of silly and it's been exaggerated for the show ring, there was a purpose for that.
Yes.
Having the little bulbs on the end of the ears, for example, in some circumstances, were to keep the tips of the ears from freezing up and potentially causing frostbite, etc.
Yeah, pom-poms on the wrists.
Yes.
Keep the wrist warm. And
absolutely keep those joints limber and whatnot. So when they're puppies and they haven't necessarily developed their adult coat yet, they usually will have a thick double coat if they are meant to be water dogs. It always amazes me actually when my toddlers go swimming and they come out and they're almost instantly dry because that top coat really seals and the top coat has all of this oil and structure that helps the water shed. The undercoat that's really soft that would get wet doesn't actually get exposed to the water. So when the dogs come out and shake for the first time, most of the water is shed and they're barely even
That's
wet.
amazing, yes.
It really
That is amazing,
It's such a purpose-built coat. But when they're puppies, they don't necessarily have that yet. So we want to be really, really careful, especially with our puppies, that when they get their first introductions to water, it's in a controlled way and it is with water that is either, you can go to indoor dog pools, etc. for an
they're
introduction.
getting more popular, yes.
Yep, absolutely. Or if you're outside in the real world, just make sure that the spring temperatures have kicked in to be warm enough that that's not going to be too hard on your dogs.
Yeah, or even you get a kid's wading pool and just put a little bit of water and let the sunshine warm it up. And
Another thing that I'm really cautious about when introducing my dogs to water initially is that there's not a lot of debris in the water that we're working with. So even though I know that I will be heading to a point where I want my dogs to be very comfortable with any sort of debris in the water, beaver ponds, etc. There's all very, very messy ponds usually when we're at a test.
Yes.
So they need to be comfortable with that. But I want to make sure that initially that's not the case so that it doesn't throw them off. I'll add that in later. Once they know that, oh, this water stuff is great and I love it, then I will worry about adding in the messy ponds, the beaver ponds, the debris ponds, etc., so that they learn how to swim and then swim over top of logs, etc., when they're out there. That's quite a sight to behold as well. Watching a dog power through the water and power over logs and whatnot to get the duck and then bring it back. And a wet, heavy duck when they're they're climbing back over the logs. Like,
that is,
it's a pretty wonderful thing. I really love that. So I start with clean areas though, and I like to start with a gradual entry. How do you first teach your dogs how to swim?
One thing I do stay away from is we have a lot of little streams in our area, and they got rocks and rocky bottoms, and there's a little bit of a toe, like a little bit of current. And I started my Sheltie puppy in one of them, and she never liked the water, and I blame it on my introduction.
Okay.
I think the water temperature was fine. However, I think the rocky bottom gave her a little bit of instability, and then I think the little current of the stream was a little bit
just too much for
her because
How old was she when you introduced her?
She was probably about maybe 12 weeks.
Okay.
So she was still tiny, and she was already a nervous dog by nature, and I think not having good footing and that current, I think it threw her off. I think I did that myself, and but you live and learn.
Yep.
And ideally, I think she would have been best in a little kid's wading pool, maybe with some sand on the bottom to give her some good traction, or finding a gradual entry, maybe lake with no waves, like a really still day.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I love the gradual entry because I can help the puppy first off get used to the idea that water under their feet is a great thing. So I'll often take a toy and I'll go down to the gradual entry and we'll just do retrieves along the shoreline.
Right,
I'll play with the puppy along the shoreline. We engage and interact and have fun, and I make sure that we're sort of moving in and out of that water, and they're getting the feel of it on their feet. That we're going in a little bit deeper, etc. They're learning that it's not scary. It's something they can control. They can find their way out of it, etc. And then if I have a puppy that's fairly confident about it and having a good time, I actually will pick them up and I'll walk out a little bit further with them. Usually the first time it's just to the point where the water goes like past their chest level. So they can still touch the bottom, and I'll put them down and I'll toss a little toy, and I'll teach them that they can move from that position in the water back to shore easily. I teach them how to control that. I teach them that they can. A lot of the times when puppies show anxiety about something, it's just because they don't know how to contend with it just yet. So if we show them how to escape this situation and how to control getting in and out of this situation, a lot of the times it becomes a piece of cake.
Right. Yes.
So I'll bring them out a little bit further, and then once they're doing great with that, I'll do the same thing, but I'll take them out far enough where they have to actually paddle a couple of strokes before they touch down to the bottom. And then from there, they realize that, I can control this situation. I do know how to swim. Incidentally, my Rottweiler is the only one that did the big high kick paddle in the water. All of my Tollers have very gracefully gone into swimming. And I think it's because of this. I think it's because they're not in this big, deep situation where they don't know where to go and what to do. And they've had this gradual introduction where they've basically walked out. So it's just an extension of walking. Right? We've all probably seen these videos of puppies being held up over water, and the puppies automatically start to move their legs and swim. It's an instinctual behavior. So if we tap into that instinct and help the puppies learn how to control the scenario.
Would you put a life jacket on a young puppy?
That's an interesting question. I actually do not. Because I have Tollers that are very adept at swimming, and because of the way I introduce things, I find that life jackets are actually a hindrance.
That's what I would think,
scenario. Yeah. So if I had a dog if I didn't have access to a gradual entry, if I had a dog that was a little bit unsure, and in a situation where I have a dog that's likely to sink. And that might sound strange to some of our audience, but if you're an audience member who has a bull mastiff or a very heavy chested breed like that, Frenchies, French bulldogs, for example, pugs, some of those breeds, they're likely to sink.
Right.
So a life jacket is something that is you'll want to
especially
use
with the brachiophilic breeds.
Yes.
Because they don't breathe well, and if they get a nose full of water, that's
that is a really good point. Yeah, so I have some of those things to consider on our dangers list for sure, and that is such a smart thing to think about when it comes to the use of life jackets. Have you ever used one with your dogs?
I have used one with when I'm on a boat with them.
Okay.
So if they've gone out on boats with us, they've always had their life jackets on, just in case something happens and I get knocked out. You know, the dogs, have some safety there. Yeah. And I have put a life jacket on Atari, the Sheltie, who was afraid didn't like swimming.
Okay.
And because I don't know, I think, were you there that day that she floated? We went to a dock diving pool for the McCann picnic.
Okay.
And Atari wouldn't move her legs.
Oh.
And I think she would have just sank. So we put a life jacket on her and she floated around the pool and never twitched a leg once, and she won the Big Chicken Award.
Somebody had to win it.
Right, yes. So, yeah, I've had them on just for safety in boating because everyone should have a life jacket on, and just on Atari there.
Yeah, and I do actually use them on boats as well when I go out in the canoe with the dogs. Right. The biggest reason is that once they're in the water, should they happen to topple out or for whatever reason, should they happen to jump out of the canoe, I need a handle to get them back in.
Right, yes.
And it can be really hard, especially with a canoe. It can be easier with other watercraft, the stand-up paddle boards, for example, and kayaks are a little bit easier. But my partner is an avid sailor, so we do spend a lot of time sailing with the dogs, and I make sure that they have a life jacket there as well. And the biggest reason is that handle on the back of the life jacket. Yes. Should they ever, fall off the side, the last thing I want is for my dog to slip off the edge and me not be able to reach in and grab them.
And if they're slipping off the edge, they could bump their head too and momentarily be knocked out. And
yeah, most definitely. So there are definitely places for life jackets in our training. But in terms of teaching them to swim, unless I had a dog that was really inclined to do the, butt down, head up and the big paddling thing, I might use a life jacket to try to even that dog out and teach them how to properly use their body. But I think that for me, the gradual entry process that I use,
that
it
sounds smart.
Really teaches them how to use their body effectively without having to go into that big weird, I don't know what you call it, but it's just like a chaotic mess.
Yes, my one Malinois Sabre used to swim like that, and it almost looked like she was trying to climb out of the water. It looked like she was trying to climb out.
It feels very panicked to me when I see that happen. It feels like a giant panic situation for the dog where they're just not sure how to control their body and they're not sure how to get out. Right. And of course, it's not a very efficient swim because their rear end is too far down and their front end is just like all this energy is coming up out of the water. Right. So they don't actually make any motion. And then I feel like that leads to more panic and more panic. So I really like to teach them how to physically control it with that gradual entry. And then I find that I just don't have that issue.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. So great ways to teach and some important factors when it comes to life jackets. Right, yes.
And if you have a swimming pool, it's important to teach your dog how to get out in case they accidentally fall in when no one's watching.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. And if you have an in-ground pool that has a nice set of stairs, it's easy for them to get out. If you have an above-ground pool, you might need to get a special ladder where they're able to walk out of there. But yeah, that's a really good point. And if you have a dog that is absolutely obsessed with the water, you'll want to make sure that you put fail-safes in place so that they're not falling in through the pool cover, etc. when they decide to go for a swim. That would be a very sad summer activity for sure.
We interrupt this deep thought for some swimming meditation with Ned. Happy training.
So some of the other dangers, because there are some dangers that come along with water that a lot of the times are a surprise for people. One that often comes as a big surprise is the water toxicity factor.
Yes.
And this can happen to humans and dogs, which is, it was even more surprising for me when I realized that this was a possibility for humans, the water toxicity thing. So too much water is not a good thing, and you can get to the point where it becomes toxic. With some of those dogs that swim with a little bit of a chaotic energy, especially, they will often also bite at the water, swallow a lot of water, etc., and they can get to the point where it's just too much. With my own tollers, I've had a couple that do swallow a lot of water and end up with a lot of peeing behaviors, et cetera, later on down in the day. But I try as much as possible to avoid that. So have you found any good tactics that work to keep dogs from swallowing water?
Well, just teaching them how to swim properly is the first one. I haven't, because I haven't had avid swimmers.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not, I think my dogs often try to avoid the water. Yes. They go in because they love to retrieve.
Okay.
So it's like my ball's floating in the water. It's the only way to go get it. Yeah. Yes.
Well, that is actually one of the tactics that I will use with dogs that like to bite at the water, especially. Sometimes dogs will, as they're swimming along, they bite at the water, or they bite at bubbles in the water, for example, or they might be making some splashes themselves, and then they bite at that. I find that some border collies swimming will have a huge tendency towards that, and I think it's probably that drive and herding instinct and stimulation going on. So a lot of the times with those dogs, just having them carry a toy will help them to stop swallowing all that water. Some dogs, it's really hard to get them to stop with the water swallowing. Even with the toy, the level that they swim at in the water, the water tends to slide into their mouth and then down their throat, of course, because they don't really spit like we would. So it ends up in a situation where that dog needs to have plenty of breaks, and I will do that with all my dogs. The last thing I want to do is have them swim to the point of exhaustion. And tollers would. They really, really would. And especially my own tollers that tend to have a lot of opportunity to swim, because I love swimming and I love my dogs swimming, and I could watch dogs swim and run all day long. So chasing bubbles, swallowing water as they swim, those can be dangerous behaviors. A toy can be a helpful thing. I know some people who have resorted to muzzling their dogs when they swim, and I'm always really cautious about muzzles. Basket muzzles can be a good idea for warm behavior activities, etc. They can really help to prevent the dog from picking things up off the ground. As far as whether they'll help with the dog not swallowing water, I'm not so sure.
It'll just go in,
Yeah, and I wouldn't want to put, what are the other muzzles called? Basket and the ones that actually close.
Like the ones like a husher muzzle or something like that they can't even open their mouths.
Exactly.
I don't like those.
That is incredibly dangerous, especially in situations where there's any sort of exertion going on, any sort of heat going on. Dogs will expel heat from their body through panting as one of the primary means of cooling. And if they have a muzzle on that holds their mouth closed, they cannot cool. And that is extremely dangerous. So know that if you are getting into, muzzles for some dogs will hoover things up on the ground and don't necessarily have the training in them to leave things alone. So some people will use muzzles for that situation, which is great for stopping the rehearsal of things while you teach other behaviors, but be very aware if it's a warm day or if they're doing anything other than just laying there, you don't want to have one of those muzzles that keep their mouth closed.
No, those are, I don't like those at all. I shudder anytime I see them at the stores.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of a toy, if they are swimming and swallowing water, get a toy that's nice and thin and long so it keeps their mouth a little bit more
And a toy
closed.
that floats too.
Yes. Oh, yeah. A floating toy. Good idea. And where'd my toy go? Oh, I got to go buy another one.
Something nice and bright too.
Yes.
Like bright orange or something like that. So we can see it, and the dog. Well, I don't know if the dog can. Is that one of the colors in their spectrum? Bright orange?
Yeah. Well, orange isn't. It actually has the same tonal value as green.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay.
If you're curious what we're talking about, Google dog vision, and you'll be able to come up with pictures of dog vision versus human vision in the color spectrum
I think
they have.
yellow they see well.
Yeah, there's some colors that they see very well and some colors they don't. The reason that we use orange bumpers when we're doing blind work in the field is that they can't see it until they're right on top of it and can see the shape, because orange and green are the same tonal value for dogs.
Okay,
so I know that one for certain.
But at least we can see the toy if it,
absolutely. Well, and it's funner.
Right.
And orange is awesome. Right. Orange is my favorite color, so go figure. I also want to talk about balance when it comes to swimming, because having tollers, having dogs that are obsessive about water, I recognize how important it is to force breaks so that they have some downtime. But I also recognize how important it is to create good listening skills around water.
Yes.
And Ned was a really good reminder lesson when he was a puppy, because he was by far the most obsessed out of the gate toller that I've had when it comes to water. And he would do anything to go and interact with water. I actually have a video from the first time I met him. I flew to BC to pick him up, which is the other side of the country. We're in Ontario.
How come you didn't get a Nova Scotia Duck Point Retriever?
It might be in the future at some point. I mean, who knows? I've actually gone to 4 different breeders for my tollers, because I'm always chasing the pedigree that I like.
Yeah. And not one's been in Nova Scotia, has it?
No, none of them yet have been in Nova Scotia. One was in Virginia, 2 were local here in Ontario, and 1 was out in BC. And I'm returning to BC to get my next toller, because I'm so thrilled with Ned and the start that he had in life. But that's besides the point. So when I first flew out to meet him, we were sitting having a barbecue and hanging out with the puppies and getting to know all the puppies. And there was a kiddie pool in the yard. And I have a video of Ned the first time I saw him wallow in water. And like, as this 8-week-old puppy, he was like, "Let me at that pool." And he went running over and he plopped down in it. And he was like, this is the best life ever. And I was laughing on the video because I was like, oh my gosh, he's going to fit right in with my dogs. And as soon as he came home, the stream on the McCann property, he was obsessive about. If there was puddles when we were walking, he was obsessive about it. I would actually even bring a bottle of water on our walks to use as part of the reward system, because he would do anything for water. Yep. So
how about if you have if you're watering the flowers in the yard?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the spray hose. Yeah.
We've actually done a ton of hose work. It's one of the ways that I teach them how to keep their ears listening when they're in stimulation mode is with flirt poles and with hoses. And I'll explain a little bit about how I do that. So a flirt pole is basically, it looks like a horse whip. It's got a strong handle end, and then it's got a loose end that you can attach things
like a buggy whip.
Like a buggy whip. Yeah, exactly. But you're not using it to whip the dog or anything of that horrid nature. You're using it to attach a toy to the end. And basically the flirt pole allows you to fling the toy, but keep control of it. So I'll do a lot of work with my dogs. And these are things that get used a lot in pointer dog training as well, because you can control the motion of the thing. So I can work on having this, lunge line out with the toy attached to the end, and I can move it around. And I can work on chase with the toy, and then I can work on, get it, tug, play. And I can also work on chase and then sit, chase and then stop chasing, chase and lie down, chase and listen to me, respond to your name and come into me, etc. Because I have full control of that toy. And I do the same thing with the hose, because you have the nozzle attachment the gun attachment, whatever it's called. Well, I don't know what it's called.
A nozzle.
Nozzle. We'll call it a nozzle. Correct us if we're wrong. So basically I can squeeze the nozzle and turn on the water, and I can let my dog chase the water. And of course they love that. Yes. Chasing the water. And then I can turn off the water and ask for a sit. And then once they get used to, okay, the water goes off, the stimulation goes away, I can listen to basic commands. Now I will slow the water instead of stopping it and ask for the sit or ask for the lie down and reinforce heavily by saying, yes, get it, and starting the water again. So it's not even necessarily that I'm using food or other rewards in that situation. The reward is that you can make the water stop, and you can make the water turn back on again by having good listening skills.
Oh, good.
So, and if they don't listen, then I can stop the water right away. And you know what? You didn't listen. You made the water go away. You better listen better next time, sort of thing.
And those flowers are angry that you made the water go off.
They're thirsty.
Yes.
They're all looking up at the sky and singing in an angry tone. Where did our water go? Oh my goodness.
I remember we used to put, 2 of my dogs loved the sprinkler. And we'd put the sprinkler on in the yard, and those 2 dogs would run and jump through it. And every once in a while, one of them would grab it in their mouths and run around, dragging the hose and sprinkling everyone. And it was just so much fun.
It is so much fun. And when you get a dog that figures out that they can grab the hose and run with it, you better run fast.
Run, yes.
I've been in that situation a time or two. It wasn't me that was supposed to be getting wet there, little puppy. So we were talking about balance.
Right.
We were talking about making sure that you create a listening dog around water. And like I said, Ned was this early introduction for me, or recent reminder, I guess, not early introduction, but recent reminder for me because he was so obsessive. So I actually ended up, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, I actually ended up gatewaying the water. So in order to get to the water, he had to first do something that I wanted him to do. And that created a dog that instead of like impulsively running and jumping in everybody's backyard swimming pool as soon as he saw water, would ask permission for it first. So I have a very clear go swim command with my dogs. When we're on casual walks, for example, when I'm just walking the property here, I don't mind if they go in and out of the stream on their own. But there are times, this week was an example. We had lesson 1 this week for our life skills students, where we have the in-person students. We have all of the students from classes come to a common lesson without their dogs, and we do a bunch of demonstrations. And I didn't want Ned to be dirty. I groomed him in the morning so that he'd look nice for the show, and, you know, brushed him out and made sure that he smelled nicer than he does on an average day, because he's in and out of the stream all the time. You know, he gets kind of stinky. It's typical sporting breed. They're just muckers. But yeah, I wanted him to stay clean. So having that control allowed me to still walk the property, but every time he started heading towards the water, I was able to say, nope, Ned, leave that, and call him back towards me, and he was able to stay clean for that evening, even though typically he's allowed to go in and out of the stream at will. And I mean, there's no problem with that. He understands that, okay, well, I just have to listen, and it's just part of my life, and you know, there's no resentment there. A lot of the times people will think, oh, I'm depriving him, and it's not. That's not the case. There's going to be other days in this week that he's going to be able to swim. Sometimes you just can't swim. I mean, all winter long, there's no opportunity to swim, and I don't feel like I'm depriving him then. So
yes. Well, I have another swimming kind of story. Our Malinois Sabre, my husband was throwing a stick for her into, I think we were up on like Lake Huron or something like that. And she was that frantic type of swimmer. So there was a lot of splashing. And he could throw that stick out pretty far, and it went out pretty far, and somehow she got herself all turned around and mixed up, and she couldn't find the stick. And then she started just swimming out into Lake Huron. And we were calling her, but I think she couldn't hear us anymore because she had a very strong recall. And I remember my husband stripping down to his underwear and going out after her.
Oh, goodness.
Because she was just...
I hope it was warm.
It was summer, so it was okay. Good. It was in the evening. So be prepared for the unexpected. Like, somehow she got herself mixed up, was still looking for the stick, and instead of coming back to us, she just was swimming out to Timbuktu. I don't know what was out there. And... yeah, it was frightening. It's like, oh, like, look how deep she is. Look how far she is. So, yeah, you never know. I'll put like a floating long line on dogs too. You never know when ducks are going to appear and your dog wants to join the ducks, or or a turtle appears on a log and they want to go check it out. So if you don't, if you're not 100% sure, have a floating long line, but do supervise, because that long line couldn't get caught up. So,
absolutely.
So I'm always prepared to go into the water after my dogs.
Yes.
So
good call.
Yeah, I don't wear my Sunday best when I take them to the lake. If
it's probably not wise anyway.
I remember my dad jumping off a dock once because one of our boxers jumped off the dock when I was a kid and did not reappear right away.
Oh, goodness.
And he just sunk like a stone. And I remember my dad like waiting about 3 seconds, and then my dad just jumped, and the dog was on his way up. But
okay.
Yeah.
See, there's some of those breeds that sink.
Right,
they don't have natural tendency to swim, and they have that barrel chest, and it's physically more awkward for them. Wow.
One time we were walking through a marsh, and it was all green. So it appears like, I know it's like duckweed and all that, but to Iggy, it appeared like, oh, maybe that's grass. And Iggy stepped off the marsh thing and boof into this most horrid bog water.
Oh, no.
And I remember having to reach in and haul her out, and
She wasn't a fan of swimming or didn't know how?
She knew how, but it was so boggy and
gotcha.
disgusting. And so now when I cross these like, you know, marsh walks,
Yep.
it's like I keep my dog on leash very close to me because I always remember Iggy going into the bog and
Oh my goodness,
yeah,
not
and
recognizing.
not
Gotcha.
recognizing it wasn't land, it was a bog.
Yeah, and they're pretty stinky too.
Oh, it was
I
disgusting.
bet she got a bath after that.
Yes, yes.
So yeah, obsession, it can be something that can be a little bit tricky with dogs, but doing some obedience around it, making sure that they'll listen, making
Right.
sure that they'll recall out of it, etc. And dogs are tremendously situational. So a dog that has a great recall on land, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to have a good recall in the water.
Right.
So this is why I find that doing some work along the shore, incorporating the water into it, etc., I find that is so helpful
Right.
for creating good listening skills in the water. And of course, this is a thing that I need when I do field work. I need my dogs to be responsive in the water.
Right.
Like in the early levels of field work, they go out, get the duck, come back. No big deal. But when you get higher up in field work, you do what's called handling, where there's a blind retrieve. The dog has not seen the retrieve fall, and you do on land and in water. They have to be willing to stop, turn, face you, and take direction. And you'll give them casts, you know, the different casts to send them in different directions. So I need my dogs to be responsive in the water. If they're halfway across the pond and I toot my whistle, the expectation, and what I've taught, of course, and the expectation is that they stop, turn and face me, and wait for that direction. When they're on land, they stop and sit facing me. So that's a little bit more of a concrete thing, but in water, they need to be able to tread water.
Right.
So that's an interesting
Yes,
thing
very
for them to
interesting,
learn
yes.
as well. And they do that brilliantly. It amazes me that they know how to swim and propel themselves, but also how to stop and tread water and not move anywhere because they're facing me now. They'd be swimming back in my direction, which is not the desired thing.
Right.
I want them where they are so that they can take information on where I know that bird or bumper is going to be, because they don't know where it is. Well, that was a fun episode. I hope everybody has a really, really fun time swimming with their dogs and having a blast. When you're looking for areas to swim with your dogs, be aware of water toxicity, but also be aware of things like blue-green algae. You know, there can be some chemical runoff in ponds that can be extremely dangerous for dogs. Choose your swimming places wisely, and if there is a sign that says blue-green algae is present, which unfortunately is happening earlier and earlier in our climate right now, avoid swimming in that area. There's also some tests that you can do if you have ponds on your own property and you're wanting to make sure that they're safe for your dogs. There's some tests that you can do in terms of collecting water and seeing what the algae actually does to determine whether or not that's blue-green algae. It looks very similar to just regular duckweed and pond scum and whatnot. If you Google that, it was a University of Davies test, so reliable source, and you can hopefully figure out whether or not that is going to be a danger for your dog or not. But do use caution with that.
Yeah. Oh, one other thing I could add too is that when you have a big dog or any dog and you're out more in the deep water and the dog's not a great swimmer and you're trying to help them along, wear a t-shirt over your bathing suit because their little legs are flailing, and if they have sharp nails, you can really get scratched. I had a couple of good scratches one day and realized I need to wear a t-shirt when I'm in the water with this dog.
Good call. Good call. And interesting, actually, before we move on from this, you just reminded me of when Jaden was young and I was hearing about webbed toes, and I would spread his toes and I would like, oh yeah, he's got webbed toes. And I was desperate to find out how that actually looked underwater. And you can see when you're looking over top of the water, you can see that their feet get really big, but I was like, really interested to see how it actually worked and like the actual visual. So I got an disposable underwater camera, and I was up at the cottage and I was under the water and I snapped a whole bunch of pictures of him when he was swimming. So I have these like really great, and now, I mean, it's so much easier to get underwater video photography and like all sorts of things that have progressed in terms of technology. And I have these great pictures of his feet, and you would never believe how massive they get. It's so evident why they're such efficient swimmers, because they spread their toes as they're swimming and they push back with these like frog-like feet. Yeah. And it's fascinating.
Interesting, yes.
Anyways, that's an interesting point to end on. So on that note, I'm Instructor Shannon.
I'm Instructor Christine.
Happy training.
This episode was brought to you by McCann Dogs Life Skills 1. where your dog will learn to come when called, walk nicely on a leash, ignore distractions, listen and respond to your voice commands quickly and happily, and stop jumping up on family and guests. Join us in person or online. For more information, please visit mccandogs.com. Happy training!